During the company party, my wife's lover took her from me and danced with her. In the middle of the track illuminated by colored lights, he held it as if it were his right, as if my presence there was irrelevant. My hands shook. The glass of whiskey I was holding almost slipped from my fingers. Frozen, I watched the cruel spectacle unfolding before everyone. Colleagues around them murmured, some laughed, others looked away, but no one intervened. They knew. Everyone knew. Only I seemed to have been the last to understand. She threw her head back, laughing as if this were the most unforgettable night of her life, as her lover twirled her around the room with a confidence that made me feel small. How dare he? How did she have the courage? My chest burned with shame and anger, but my body didn't react. Should I go over there and rip her out of his arms? Should I punch him in the middle of the party? Should he just disappear, swallowed by humiliation? Inside, I was dying. A piece of me crumbled every second that scene continued. They didn't try to hide it, there was no guilt in her eyes. Just an unabashed pleasure, a pleasure that was no longer mine. And when the song came to an end, he pulled her waist tightly and whispered something in her ear. She smiled, that smile that was once mine and now belonged to another man. Applause filled the room, as if celebrating my misfortune. He held her hand and, without ceremony, led her to a more private corner. My legs finally responded. I took a step forward, but hesitated. I wanted to run after her, I wanted to snatch her away and make her remember who her husband was, but something held me back. It wasn't just the shock, it was something deeper. A feeling. And then, I understood. This wasn't just a passing fling, a meaningless fling. This was something that had been going on long enough that he felt safe to claim her in front of everyone. Enough time for her to accept being taken without fear, without remorse. Long enough for me, fool, to have been deceived. The pain gave way to a biting cold. I couldn't explode there, I couldn't lower myself. Not that night. I needed something bigger. Something that made every second of that humiliation worth it. I needed to turn things around. The smiles around me were disguised, the conversations muffled. Everyone already knew. Except me. How long did they hide this from me? How long was I the idiot in the story? I looked at her one last time. Your eyes sparkled as you met his. She didn't see me anymore. It didn't matter if I was there or not. I swallowed hard. The empty glass was still in my hand, but the bitter taste was no longer just coming from the drink. It was the taste of contempt, of abandonment. From the end. But something inside me started to move. A different heat, a drive, a fierce desire not to leave there as a loser. I wasn't going to let them laugh at me. I wasn't going to allow this betrayal to become the only thing I would be remembered for. The music has changed. The hall continued its party. They thought I would leave, that I would stay there, still, chewing on the pain, sinking into the role of betrayed. But no. Something was about to change. Something they didn't expect. And when I took my first step out of that dark corner, a plan began to form in my mind. I still didn't know exactly how, but that betrayal wouldn't end like this. Little did they know that the game was just beginning. Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal will never be romanticized or justified. Our stories are fiction, but the pain, impact and consequences are real. The goal is to show how betrayal destroys lives, ruins trust and leaves scars that never disappear. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is an intense story, full of twists and turns and raw emotions. Hold on tight, because this story will shock you. Night fell slowly, covering the city in a blanket of bright lights and long shadows. At the top of the mirrored building where they worked, the company event took place in style. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed and faces reflected the golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. For Daniel and Emily, that event was just one of many others that marked the years they spent together. Since the beginning of their marriage, corporate parties were part of their routine, but over time, they became less exciting, just social commitments that they needed to fulfill. Still, that night, there was something different in the air. Something almost imperceptible, but present, subtle like a whisper, something Daniel couldn't name, but felt deep in his chest. Emily looked stunning in an elegant red dress, her wavy hair falling lightly over her shoulders and her smile radiant, as if she was more alive than ever. She had always been a sophisticated woman, someone who attracted attention without having to make an effort. Ever since they met, Daniel was impressed by the way she dominated any environment, with her striking presence and undeniable charm. For years, this magnetism made him feel like the luckiest man in the world. He liked watching how she dealt with people, how her natural charisma made anyone feel comfortable in her presence. That night, however, something was different. Her gaze seemed to shine differently, and her laugh echoed looser, more spontaneous. Something inside Daniel twisted, but he ignored it. Maybe it was just an impression. Daniel has always been proud of the relationship he built with Emily. They were a solid couple, admired by many. Friends and colleagues often said that the two were made for each other, that they were the kind of couple who seemed unshakable. He believed it. In the early years, everything between them was intense, the conversations, the trips, the way they made plans for the future. It was difficult to imagine that anything could shake that connection. But time, always it, had shaped their days differently. The love still existed, but now it was more contained, less explosive. The routine gradually settled in, and the conversations, previously so long and involving, became more objective and practical. This was natural, he told himself. All marriages went through this. But that night, there was an unease growing in his chest, a silent restlessness that he couldn't explain. He watched her as she chatted animatedly with some colleagues. The way she gestured, the way she tilted her head slightly while listening to someone speak, the way she smiled in a way that seemed more vibrant than usual. Something inside him warned, but he pushed the sensation away. There was no reason for distrust. Emily was his wife, his partner of years, someone he knew as well as he knew himself. He refused to believe anything was wrong. Still, he found himself analyzing his own feelings, trying to understand why that night felt different from so many others. The party continued, people danced, toasted, conversations mingled with the sound of ambient music. Daniel tried to ignore his thoughts and join in the celebration, but it was hard to shake that nagging feeling. Something was different about Emily. He couldn't say exactly what, but he felt it. He wondered if he was the problem, if maybe he was exaggerating, if he was seeing things where there were none. After all, in recent months, he had been more distracted, immersed in work, dealing with challenges that left him exhausted. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks. Emily approached him with a beaming smile and held his hand. Her fingers were delicate, and for a moment, he felt the familiar comfort of her touch. But soon she released him, picked up a glass of wine and looked around the room as if looking for something or someone. Daniel watched this small change carefully. She seemed anxious, and he felt a strange tightness in his chest. It was a silent grip, but loaded with meanings that he still didn't fully understand. The night continued, and Daniel tried to push away his worries. But then, in the crowd, he saw something that made his breath hitch for a second. Emily was dancing. But it wasn't just any dance. It wasn't a casual moment between friends. There was an intimacy there, a subtle but undeniable connection. Her body moved fluidly, and the man in front of her seemed to know exactly how to lead her. Daniel frowned, trying to understand why that scene bothered him so much. Maybe it was just an exaggeration on his part. Maybe it was just an innocent dance. But then, he noticed the look in her eyes, a different glow, a different smile, a way of moving that he hadn't seen in a long time. And it was at that moment that something inside him snapped. He didn't know what he would do. I didn't know how I would react. But one thing was certain, that night would not end like the others. The night progressed, and the room was filled with a dense heat, mixed with the smell of expensive drinks and perfumes. Daniel still held his glass, now almost empty, as his eyes remained fixed on the dance floor. He observed every detail, every movement, trying to understand what he was feeling. The discomfort wasn't just jealousy, it was something bigger, something deeper, as if a part of him was trying to warn him of something his mind couldn't yet fully process. Emily was there, just a few meters away, but at the same time it seemed so far away. Her eyes sparkled in a way he hadn't seen in a long time, and it wasn't meant for him. The man who held her by the waist, who guided her with ease, was not him. He tried to shake the feeling away, tried to convince himself that it was just a dance, that it meant nothing. But then, when their eyes met for a brief second, he realized there was nothing of him there anymore. She looked away quickly, but it was enough for something inside him to snap. Her laugh sounded louder, as if the world around her had disappeared and only the two of them remained. The man pulled her closer, and Daniel felt his heart racing in an unhealthy way. He felt his fingers tighten around the glass of the glass, a grip that bordered on uncontrollable. The blood rose hot, a mix of disbelief and silent anger. He looked around. Some people noticed the scene, but avoided looking at him directly. There was something wrong in that situation. He didn't know how long this had been going on, but he felt, with cruel clarity, that it wasn't the first time. The way the man touched Emily, the naturalness with which she responded, the way they moved together, that wasn't new. The heat of anger mixed with the coldness of shock. His mind worked in disarray, trying to find a reason, a context, a justification that would explain what he was seeing. But the truth was raw. And it was there, exposed, with no possibility of denial. The song came to an end, and he saw her smile at the man, a silent complicity between the two. The man whispered something in her ear, and Emily just nodded, as if it were all natural, as if nothing was out of place. Daniel felt his stomach drop. He wanted to do something. I wanted to go there, I wanted to interrupt that moment, I wanted to demand explanations. But what would you say? He didn't even know what was actually happening. He watched them walk away, walking around the room together, as if looking for a more discreet place. Something inside him pulsed uncontrollably, a primitive instinct, a need to act, to stop this from going any further. But he didn't move. His legs felt heavy, his body anchored to the ground as if he were trapped in that cruel reality. Minutes passed, and he realized that Emily was no longer in sight. The man was also gone. Daniel felt his mouth dry, and a cold sweat ran down the back of his neck. He tried to take a deep breath, tried to convince himself that he was exaggerating, that maybe she had just gone to the bathroom, or talked to someone in a more private corner. But a voice inside him screamed, insistent, saying that he knew exactly where she was. Without thinking, he began walking, feeling the weight of what he was about to discover pressing down on his chest. Every step was a torment. The path to the event's most reserved corridors seemed longer than usual. The heart beat loudly, hard, and the voices around him became a distant noise. He didn't know what he would find, but something inside him told him that nothing would be the same again. The hallway was dimly lit, the sounds of the party muffled by the walls. He stopped for a second, closed his eyes, tried to prepare himself. But how does one prepare to see their life fall apart? He took a deep breath and moved on. It was then that he heard it. The muffled laughter. Breathing quickened. The murmur of intimate voices. He approached, feeling the ground slip away from beneath his feet. Time seemed to slow down as he reached out and pushed the door ajar. What he saw was enough to freeze every muscle in his body. Emily was there, with him. The close faces, the intimate whispers, the bodies glued together in an involvement that left no doubt. The betrayal was before his eyes, with no room for denial, no possibility of any excuse. Daniel's chest burned, a sharp shock piercing every fiber of his being. The world around him fell apart, and everything he knew shattered there, in that instant. Emily, his Emily, the woman he loved, the woman he shared years of his life with, was in the arms of another man. And in that moment, he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after impact was deafening. Daniel felt his head spinning, his stomach twisting into a knot that seemed to pull him inside himself. Emily's eyes widened when she saw him standing there in the doorway, but she didn't try to move away immediately. The other man turned slowly, as if trying to gauge the situation before reacting. Daniel's gaze ran over every detail, every evidence of betrayal displayed before him, the bodies too close, their breathing still rapid. Time seemed to have slowed down, as if it wanted to drag out that pain for as long as possible. But then, the shock began to give way to the burning heat of fury. Daniel's voice was low and sharp, so full of tension that it seemed to split the air in half. He didn't ask why. There was no need. He already knew. I already understood everything. What he wanted now was something more. Something no one was prepared to deal with. Emily took a hesitant step, as if she were trying to find an explanation that would alleviate what she had done, but any attempt to justify herself seemed ridiculous at that moment. She whispered his name, as if that could break the invisible barrier that now separated them, but Daniel just laughed, a bitter, humorless laugh. He passed his hand over his face, breathing deeply, as if trying to control something that threatened to explode inside him. But then, before Emily could say anything, he spoke first. His voice was firm, but there was something almost dangerous about it. He said that, in recent months, the company had undergone important changes, that he had been working on something that could completely change the direction of his career and, consequently, the life that the two shared. Emily frowned, not understanding why he was talking about work at that moment. But he continued. He explained that recently he had been more absent, that he had spent entire nights planning, coordinating, waiting for the right moment to reveal to her the surprise he had been preparing. He paused for a long time, watching the way she was still trying to assimilate his words. Then, with a lower, almost cold tone, he blurted out the truth. He had been promoted. It wasn't just any promotion. He wouldn't just be a name within the company. He would own part of it. He had bought strategic shares, closed deals that would give him control over important decisions. He had finally achieved everything he dreamed of, and over the last few months he had worked to make their lives more comfortable than it had ever been. He planned a future where Emily would never have to worry about anything again. Her face twitched slightly, as if a new understanding was slowly dawning on her. Her eyes wavered, and it was at that moment that he realized. She knew. Emily finally understood the gravity of what she had done. But Daniel wasn't finished yet. Because, in the middle of this process, when he started to negotiate his position within the company, he started to hear rumors. Little comments, whispers in hallways that he initially ignored. He was so focused on his goal, so absorbed in achieving what he so desired, that he refused to pay attention to anything that was not directly linked to his goal. But then, the rumors started to take shape. The gazes of colleagues became different. Some were sorry, others were hesitant, but no one dared to say anything directly. Until one day, one of the company's oldest partners called him for a private conversation. An experienced man, who had seen everything inside those offices. He didn't need to say much. He just mentioned that there was something Daniel needed to know before taking on the new position. That certain information reached everyone, eventually. And then, he showed the proof. Photographs, messages, records that left no doubt. Emily's eyes widened again, and Daniel took bitter pleasure in seeing the panic begin to rise within her. Because he already knew. Long before that night, long before that party, long before he opened that door and saw her with another man, Daniel already knew. He had known for weeks. But he waited. He waited for the right moment. Because he didn't want to just confront her. He wanted her to come out for herself. And there she was. He watched her come undone before him, as he tried to find words to soften the undeniable truth. But there was nothing to be said. He already had everything he needed. He let her believe that she had control of the situation, that she could continue to carry out this charade. But the truth is, he was just waiting for it. By silent confession. For the moment when he could look her in the eyes and see her understand that she lost everything. The other man, until then silent, tried to intervene, but Daniel didn't even pay attention to him. He didn't matter. It never mattered. Because it wasn't about him. It was about Emily. About her choice. She tried to touch him, but he backed away. His look was no longer one of pain. It wasn't out of anger. It was something much worse. Indifference. And in that instant, Emily knew. She knew that from that moment on, Daniel was no longer hers. And she could never undo that. The silence stretched between them, heavy as lead, filling the space with suffocating tension. Emily opened her mouth a few times, but nothing came out. There was no plausible justification, no excuse that could erase what he had done. Daniel's look on her was no longer anger, nor hurt, it was something much worse. He no longer saw her the same way, and she felt it. It was as if his presence, once so significant to him, was now nothing more than an irrelevant detail. The man next to her, the one who had once seemed so sure of himself, now had a tense expression, as if he expected the worst. Maybe he expected an outbreak, a punch, a scandal. But nothing came. Daniel just took a deep breath and took a step back, as if he was ready to leave. Emily moved, trying to catch up to him, but he dodged it effortlessly. Her heart hammered inside her chest, a growing panic dominated her, because now she understood that she was losing everything. She whispered his name, her voice shaky, almost pleading. But he remained motionless, his gaze fixed on nothingness, as if she were no longer real to him. Then, finally, he broke the silence. Why? The question came dry, without emotion, without weight. It was just a realization, a cold need to understand the logic behind the destruction. Emily blinked, feeling the ground slip away from her feet. She didn't know what to answer. Could you say that you felt alone? That you needed something new? That you didn't plan any of this? None of the answers seemed good enough. None of them would make a difference now. I don't know, she admitted, her voice cracking. Daniel let out a low, humorless laugh. You don't know, he repeated, shaking his head slowly. Months. Months of cheating. Months of lying. And you don't know. Emily looked around, as if looking for a place to hide from the conversation. There wasn't. The other man moved, trying to discreetly move away, but Daniel turned his gaze to him, finally recognizing his existence. You. Stay. The tone wasn't loud, but there was a weight to those words that froze the man in place. Emily swallowed hard, realizing that it wouldn't end there. Daniel wouldn't scream. It wouldn't cause a scandal at the party. He was too smart for that. He would let her sink alone. How did it start? Daniel asked, but the question wasn't meant for her. His eyes were fixed on his lover. Tell me, was it you who sought her out, or did she offer herself? The man hesitated. He tried to open his mouth, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. I asked something, Daniel insisted, crossing his arms. The other cleared his throat, looking extremely uncomfortable. It happened naturally, he said, without looking directly at anyone. Daniel laughed again, and Emily felt a tear roll down her face. This was worse than she imagined. Naturally, Daniel repeated. That means you didn't plan. It just happened. Like an unexpected rain, or a trip on the sidewalk. I'm sorry, the lover replied, now sweating, as if he felt the real pressure of what was happening. No, you don't, Daniel replied immediately. But you will. The man blinked a few times, unsure if that was a threat. Emily felt her heart beating erratically. Daniel, she began, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "You've said enough." His voice was firm, and she knew there was nothing more she could say to change that moment. The party continued outside that corridor, completely oblivious to the tragedy that was happening inside. People laughed, toasted, celebrated. The world was spinning without realizing that, in that hidden corner, an entire story was falling apart. "How was it for you?" Daniel asked, looking at Emily now. "Was it exciting? Risky?" She didn't respond. "I couldn't." "Do you think it was worth it?" he continued. She closed her eyes, unable to bear his gaze. "Did you think about me? When he went home, when he lay in our bed? Did you think about me while you lied to me every night?" She opened her eyes again, tears flowing freely now. "Daniel, please, reply." Yes. I thought." And yet he continued. Emily had no answer for that. Daniel shook his head slowly, as if accepting, once and for all, that nothing there could be saved. Then, with one last look at both of them, he took a deep breath and turned to leave. "It's over," he said, before disappearing down the hall. Emily felt her legs weaken, her breathing quickened, as if she were about to faint. The other man was still there, looking as lost as she did. But now it didn't matter anymore. Because Daniel wouldn't look back. Not this time. Daniel left the hallway without looking back. His steps were steady, but the weight in his chest seemed to grow with each meter he walked. The music from the party still echoed through the room, but now it seemed like a distant, almost unreal noise. The voices of the people around them blended together, faces became blurs. He didn't know exactly where he was going, just that he needed to get out of there. I needed to breathe air that wasn't tainted by lies and betrayal. His mind was still processing everything that had just happened, as if his own reality had been rewritten before his eyes. He no longer felt angry, or even sad. Just a deep, cutting void. The elevator doors opened, and he got in, feeling his heart beating hard against his rib cage. As he descended, his mind revisited every detail of that night. Emily's smile as she danced, the touch she allowed another man to have on her skin, the complicit looks that once belonged only to him. She had made her choice, and he was now making his. The future he had planned so much, the promises he had made to himself and to her, all of that was now nothing more than echoes of a life that no longer existed. The doors opened, and he walked towards the exit of the building. The cold night air hit his face, but he felt no relief. Just overwhelming tiredness. He didn't want to go home. The house that until a few hours ago was his refuge was now nothing more than a place where lies were permeated on the walls, the smell, the furniture. Where each corner told a story that, in the end, was nothing more than an illusion. He took his cell phone from his pocket and opened the screen. There were several missed calls from Emily. She was already trying to reverse the situation. But there was nothing left to be saved. He continued walking aimlessly through some streets, letting his own thoughts guide him. The streets were relatively empty, except for a few cars speeding past. The loneliness of that moment was almost suffocating, but at the same time, it was there that he found clarity. Why, after everything Emily had done, did a part of him still want to understand? Still wanted to find a reason that would make it hurt less. The betrayal was clear, what he had seen left no doubt, and yet, something inside him searched for answers. The reality of a betrayed marriage came in waves, and every new memory of his life with Emily now carried a bitter aftertaste. How could he not notice? How did you allow this to happen under your nose? He tried to remember the last few months, the times when Emily smiled differently, the times when she arrived late or said she was too busy. And he, naively, believed. Because you never imagined you would need to doubt. I never wanted to imagine that the person he shared his life with was capable of something like this. He leaned against a post, breathing deeply, as if trying to stop his mind from continuing to sink into this cycle of unanswered questions. But before he could regain any control, he heard someone approaching. The sound of heels echoed across the asphalt, and he didn't need to look to know who it was. Emily had followed him. She was there, a few meters away from him, panting, her eyes red from crying. She hesitated before taking another step, as if assessing the risk of getting closer. Daniel, her voice was low, full of regret. He remained motionless, not looking at her directly. I felt her presence, but I didn't want to see her in the same way again. I couldn't let you leave like that, she continued, her voice breaking mid-sentence. He let out a short, bitter laugh. And what did you expect? For me to stay? To pretend nothing happened? Emily shook her head quickly, tears falling down her face. No. I know I made a mistake. I know there are no excuses. But I needed to talk to you. He finally turned to face her. There was something in his gaze that made her shudder. Say what? What do you regret? That it was a mistake. Does this change anything, Emily? Because I saw you. I saw everything. You didn't trip and fall into his arms. You made a choice. She sobbed, bringing her hands to her face. I don't know what to say. Daniel took a step forward, closing the distance between the two. You knew what you were doing, Emily. You knew what you were risking. She nodded frantically, trying to hold back the tears. I know. But I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't want to lose you. He was silent for a moment, analyzing those words. You've already lost me. The sentence was said with a coldness that made Emily take her breath away. She was shaking, as if her own body couldn't handle the gravity of what was happening. Daniel, please, don't tell me it's too late. I still love you. He looked away at the deserted street for a moment before looking at her again. Love? Do you call this love? She sobbed louder, but didn't respond. If you loved me, none of this would have happened. You had so many chances to stop. But it didn't stop. So don't you dare talk about love. The weight of the words caused her to slouch slightly, as if her own body was giving way under the guilt. Daniel sighed, feeling like there was nothing more to be said. He didn't want to stay there. He no longer wanted to look at her and feel everything inside him imploding. Go home, Emily. She grabbed his arm, desperate. No. Don't leave me like this. He gently removed his hand, but his decision was already made. You made your choices. Now I'm doing mine. And with that, he turned and moved on, leaving Emily behind, lost in her own despair, in the weight of her decisions and in the certainty that there was no turning back. Daniel walked without a clear destination, the city lights reflecting in his empty eyes, his mind spinning with the fragments of what had once been his life. Each step felt like it weighed tons, but stopping was not an option. He couldn't bear to stand still in the middle of that cold night, feeling the emptiness growing inside him. His world had crumbled before his eyes, but somehow he was still there, breathing, living, even if only on automatic. Emily had been left behind, plunged into the despair of a loss of her own making. He felt no satisfaction in seeing her suffer. There was no pleasure in that pain. But there was no more compassion either. Anger no longer dominated his thoughts, nor did the hurt scream so loudly. What remained was the silent acceptance of reality. It didn't matter how many tears Emily shed, how many times she tried to beg for a second chance. Nothing would erase what she did. Nothing would rebuild what was destroyed. The past was unchangeable, and the future, well, the future was something he now had to rewrite himself. His feet took him to a small, discreet bar, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. He walked in without thinking twice, sitting at the counter and ordering a strong shot of whiskey. The liquid burned his throat, but he didn't grimace. He just felt the heat slowly spread through his chest, as if that could alleviate some of the cold that had settled inside him. Rough night? The female voice came from somewhere beside him, soft, but full of genuine curiosity. He turned his face slowly, finding a woman with dark hair, an attentive look and a discreet half-smile. There were no ulterior motives there, just a silent recognition from someone who, perhaps, had already been through something similar. "You could say that," he replied, twirling the glass between his fingers. She nodded, without pressuring him to continue. "It seems like you have a lot on your mind." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "I had a whole life in my head. Now there's only one big question mark left." She tilted her head slightly, assessing him. "Let me guess. Someone destroyed everything." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Daniel saw something different there. It wasn't pity. It wasn't empty curiosity. It was something deeper, something he didn't even know if he was ready to understand. "You're right." She smirked, taking a sip of her own drink. "I've been in your shoes. I know what it's like to have something ripped away from you without warning, without anesthesia. One minute, everything seems right. The next, you're trying to understand when everything started to fall apart." Daniel remained silent for a moment, absorbing those words. "And how did you overcome it?" She let out a long sigh, looking at the amber liquid in her glass before answering. "First, I drowned in pain. Afterwards, I accepted that certain things simply cannot be fixed. And then I realized I was free." He raised an eyebrow, not hiding his skepticism. "Book? Free," she confirmed. "I spent so much time trying to fix something that was already broken, trying to understand why it happened, that I forgot it was never my problem. When I finally accepted this, I saw that I could start over." Daniel processed those words. Until that moment, he hadn't seen things that way. He always looked at his relationship with Emily as something that needed to be saved, something that deserved an effort to maintain. But now, everything seemed different. He was no longer chained to that past. He could follow. He could free himself. The woman got up, leaving some bills on the counter. "You have two options. You may continue to wonder why, drowning in memories that cannot be changed. Or you can take that question mark and turn it into a new beginning." Daniel watched her as she walked towards the exit. Before leaving, she turned and looked at him one last time. "The secret is to stop looking for the wrong answers." And then, she was gone. He stood there, staring at his own reflection in the mirror behind the counter. The words of that stranger echoed in his mind. He could continue to be lost in his pain. Or it could rebuild itself. For the first time that night, he felt like maybe there was a choice. He asked for the check, got up and left the bar. The night was still cold, but somehow the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. He didn't know what would come next, but for once, it didn't scare him. He still had a life to live. And now, this life belonged to him alone. Time passed, and with it, the dust of destruction began to settle. But some things, once broken, can never be fixed. Daniel knew this the moment he left that party, the moment he left Emily behind. He never looked back, never gave in to any of the messages she sent over the next few days, the endless calls, the desperate requests to talk. For him, Emily had ceased to exist in the way he knew her. That woman, that version he once loved, simply disappeared, giving way to someone he could never forgive. The divorce was quick. He didn't want to drag this out any longer than necessary. He made sure that everything was handled with surgical coolness, without unnecessary discussions, without emotional appeals. Emily, at first, tried to fight. He insisted that there was still something between them, that everything could be rebuilt, but, as the process progressed, he realized that Daniel was irretrievably distant. He was no longer the man who loved her, who waited for her, who built a future with her. Now, he was just someone determined to remove any trace of her from his life. The final agreement did not favor her. The apartment they previously shared was left to Daniel. He didn't want to keep something that brought back painful memories, so he quickly sold it and moved to a new place, a space that didn't carry ghosts, a space where he could finally start over. Emily, on the other hand, saw her life slowly fall apart. With the divorce, he lost the stability he valued so much. The man she risked everything for, the one who made her feel wanted and alive, disappeared as soon as the scandal came to light. When she realized that Daniel wasn't coming back, that her comfortable life was now just a remnant of the past, she tried to hold on to anything, but everything slipped through her fingers. The betrayal spread. In the work environment, views have changed. The silent judgment was worse than any scream. She came to be seen as a woman who threw away everything she had, for something that wasn't worth it. It was left aside in important projects, opportunities that previously seemed certain simply disappeared. And the lover? He turned out to be as disposable as she ever wanted to admit. As soon as the rumors started, he started relocating his life, moving away little by little, until, one day, he simply disappeared. No goodbyes, no broken promises, he just left, as if nothing had happened. Emily found herself alone. She tried to rebuild herself, she tried to justify the choices she made to herself, but every night she spent alone in her small rented apartment was a reminder of what she lost. She was the one who suffered most from the consequences of what she did. Daniel didn't attack her, didn't actively destroy her. He just let fate itself collect its debt. And he paid. As for Daniel, he moved on. The first few months were strange, as if I lived between two realities. The wedding seemed like a distant echo, something that on some days he even doubted really existed. But, little by little, he began to fill the void with new experiences. He traveled, saw places he never had time to explore before, rediscovered simple pleasures he had forgotten. And, without her realizing it, one day she woke up and realized that she no longer thought of Emily with pain, or even with anger. He thought of her indifferently, and it was there that he knew he had won. He was not alone. One day, without planning, without expectations, he met someone who wasn't part of his past, someone who didn't know him for the scars he carried, but for the man he was becoming. And this time, there were no shadows between them. There was no doubt. He learned that true love doesn't need excuses, it doesn't require sacrifices that destroy. He finally understood that happiness does not come from a broken promise, but from the freedom to live without fear of being betrayed by those who are supposed to protect him. Emily's betrayal was a wound that took a long time to heal, but in the end, it was just that, a wound. Daniel survived. He started again. He became someone better not because of her, but despite her. Emily. She spent her life trying to fix something she could never get back. Now that we've reached the end of this story, we want to know your opinion. What would you do in Daniel's place? Comment below, we want to hear what you think about this situation. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this. Remembering that here we do not support any type of betrayal, we always show the devastating consequences of this type of choice. Until the next story.